The morning sun spilled to the windows of Lincoln High, stretching golden lines across the shiny hallway floors. Students filled the corridors, laughing, shouting, swapping stories before the bell. But one student walked with quiet focus, a notebook tucked firmly against his chest. Marcus Reed, 17 years old, sharp-minded but soft-spoken, moved through the noise like a shadow. He wasn't the loudest, the strongest, or the most popular, but he carried something different: determination. He stopped outside room 204, mathematics with Mr. Harlan. Inside, the classroom buzzed with casual chatter. Desks sat in perfect rows, sunlight bouncing off the whiteboard where long equations already covered half the surface. The smell of coffee and markers filled the air. At the front stood Mr. Harlan, a man known for his strict tone, polished shoes, and sharp tongue. He believed in discipline and hierarchy, and Marcus didn't quite fit his idea of who a smart kid should be. Marcus quietly slipped into his usual seat near the back, right under the flickering ceiling light that hummed like static. A few students smirked when they saw him. Some whispered his name, not mockingly, but with that look that said, "Stay quiet, don't draw attention." Mr. Harlan turned from the board, marker in hand, scanning the class like a commander before battle. "All right, people," he said, his voice smooth but edged with condescension. "Today we're tackling something advanced, something most of you will never use in real life, but it separates those who think from those who don't." Laughter rippled faintly through the room. Marcus kept his eyes on his notebook. Mr. Harlan continued, filling the board with numbers and symbols that twisted like vines. "Now this," he said, underlining a long equation, "is a problem most college students can't solve. But here, I expect you to try." He turned around. "Who can tell me what's wrong with this expression?" Silence. Eyes darted away. Then, slowly, Marcus raised his hand. The room shifted. A few heads turned. A boy in the front whispered, "He's going to regret that." Mr. Harlan raised an eyebrow. "Yes, Mr. Reed?" Marcus spoke carefully. "Sir, I think you might have used the wrong sign on the coefficient. That would flip the result entirely." The class froze. The idea that a student, especially Marcus, would question Mr. Harlan was unthinkable. The teacher smirked. "You think I made a mistake?" Marcus didn't look away. "I'm pretty sure, yes." For a brief moment, silence filled the room. Then came the laugh, low, dismissive, echoing louder than the bell itself. Mr. Harlan turned to class. "Did you all hear that? Marcus Reed thinks I made a mistake." Laughter erupted. Marcus's ears burned, but he didn't flinch. He'd been here before, mocked, doubted, underestimated. But something inside him refused to back down. "All right then," Mr. Harlan said, crossing his arms. "Tell you what, Marcus, you think you can do better?" Marcus hesitated. No, the teacher interrupted, stepping closer. "You said I was wrong. So here's the deal. You solve this problem, right here, right now, and I'll quit my job." The class gasped. Someone whispered, "No way." Another chuckled, "He's toast." Mr. Harlan smirked, enjoying the spectacle. "Go ahead, Mr. Reed. Prove the great Mr. Harlan wrong." Marcus stood slowly. His hands trembled as he walked toward the board, the sound of every step echoing like a drumbeat. He picked up the marker, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on him. He looked at the equation. His mind raced. It wasn't impossible, but it was complex, designed to intimidate. He could see where the teacher had gone wrong. A simple sign flip that changed the entire solution. But was he confident enough to prove it? Here, in front of everyone? Behind him, whispers buzzed. "He's stalling. He doesn't know it. Harlan's going to roast him." Marcus inhaled deeply. "If I'm right," he said softly, "then the equation simplifies like this." He began to write. His hand shook at first, but his strokes grew steadier with every number, every step. The laughter faded. Even Mr. Harlan's grin began to stiffen. Marcus explained his reasoning out loud. Slow, methodical, certain. He wasn't just solving math. He was rewriting the power balance of the entire room. After a few tense minutes, he capped the marker and stepped back. The board was filled with his work. Clean, precise, correct. Mr. Harlan's smile was gone now. He stared at the board, lips tightening. The class waited for his response. For the punchline, for the dismissal, for the insult. But none came. Marcus looked down at his shoes, his voice barely above a whisper. That's the right answer. Mr. Harlan blinked, his pride fighting against the truth written right in front of him. The silence was deafening. Then, in an effort to regain control, he chuckled weakly. We'll verify that later. Sit down, Mr. Reed. But the class wasn't laughing anymore. Some students glanced at each other, uncertain. Others nodded subtly, realizing what had just happened. Marcus had caught the teacher's mistake, and everyone knew it. As Marcus returned to his seat, he felt the shift, invisible but real. The room no longer saw him as the quiet kid who stayed in the back. He had stood up, spoken truth to arrogance, and somehow he'd held his ground. Mr. Harlan turned back to board, his movement stiff. The sound of the marker scratching the surface was the only thing that broke the silence. Marcus opened his notebook and stared at the blank page before him, his pulse still racing. He wasn't sure if he'd just made an enemy or sparked something much bigger. The bell rang. Desk scraped. Students rushed out, whispering to each other, some in disbelief, others in admiration. Marcus stayed seated for a moment longer, staring at the board, then at his notebook. He didn't smile. He didn't need to, because deep down he knew one thing. This wasn't over. And as he walked out of room 204, the faint echo of Mr. Harlan's challenge lingered in the air like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The bell rang, echoing through the corridors like a final verdict. Marcus gathered his books slowly, his heart still pounding from what had just happened. The laughter still rang in his ears. Cruel, sharp, unforgettable. He kept his eyes on the floor as students brushed past him, whispering, snickering, shaking their heads like witnesses to a public defeat. He had stood up to his teacher. He had tried to correct him. And in return, he'd been laughed at, not just by the man who was supposed to teach him, but by an entire room that had chosen to watch instead of understand. As Marcus stepped into the hallway, he could still hear Mr. Harlan's voice in his head. You think I made a mistake? Then solve it and I'll quit my job. The words replayed over and over, each repetition heavier than the last. It wasn't just an insult. It was a challenge. And worse, it was a moment that everyone had witnessed. By the time he reached the cafeteria, the story had already spread. Students huddled in groups, retelling the scene like it was some comedy skit. Yo, Marcus thought he could outsmart Harlan, one kid said, laughing so loud it turned heads. Man, that was hilarious. He really thought he had it. Another chimed in. Marcus walked past him silently, his tray shaking slightly in his hands. He found an empty corner table and sat down. The noise around him blurred into a dull hum. He stared at his food, a burger gone cold, but couldn't bring himself to take a bite. Across the room, his best friend Jordan spotted him and made his way over. Jordan was one of the few people who actually understood him, the kind of friend who didn't need words to know when Marcus was hurting. Jordan dropped his backpack onto the bench and sat down across from him. Hey, he said softly. You good? Marcus didn't look up. Yeah, I'm fine. Jordan leaned back, shaking his head. Man, that was brutal. I'm sorry, bro. People can be jerks. Marcus gave a weak shrug. I shouldn't have said anything. No, Jordan replied, his voice firmer. You should have. You were right to speak up. Harlan's been riding you for weeks. Marcus glanced up, eyes burning. Doesn't matter. Nobody cares if I was right or wrong. All they saw was me getting laughed at. Jordan frowned, then sighed. Forget them, man. People forget fast. Just keep your head down. But Marcus couldn't. The scene replayed in his head, every smirk, every laugh, every glance of pity. The way Mr. Harlan looked at him, not angry, not surprised, just amused, like Marcus was a joke that dared to speak. He clenched his jaw. No, he said quietly. I'm not just going to forget it. Jordan tilted his head. What do you mean? Marcus didn't answer. He pushed his tray aside, pulled his notebook out his bag, and flipped it open to a blank page. Jordan watched, confused. You're seriously going to work on that problem? Marcus nodded slowly. He said if I solve it, he'll quit. Jordan snorted. Come on, man. He was joking. Nobody expects you to actually. I do. Marcus's voice cut through the noise. Steady. Focused. I expect me to. Jordan stared at him, searching for words. But there was something in Marcus's eyes. A quiet fire, a determination that didn't need be explained. Finally, Jordan sighed and leaned forward. All right, man. If that's what you want to do, I got your back. Marcus nodded, a faint smile flickering for the first time that day. Thanks. That night, Marcus sat at his desk long after the house had gone quiet. The ticking clock on the wall was the only sound, marking the slow passage of time. His room was small but neat, a poster of Einstein on one wall, his math book stacked neatly beside his laptop. He flipped to the page in his notebook where he had copied the equation from class, the same one that had turned his entire day upside down. He stared at it for a long moment, the symbols blurring together. This is it, he whispered. You wanted to laugh, Mr. Harlan? Let's see if you're still laughing after this. He picked up his pencil and began to write. At first, it was slow, hesitant strokes, scattered notes, lines of algebra stretching across the page. He'd saw one part, only to hit a dead end. He'd erase, rewrite, start again. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Frustration started to creep in. His pencil snapped at one point, and he slammed his hands on the desk. Why can't I get this? He muttered under his breath. He stood, pacing the room. His reflection stared back at him from the dark window. Tired eyes, clenched jaw. He saw not just a boy struggling with math, but someone who'd been underestimated one too many times. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just about a math problem. It was about every time someone told him he wasn't good enough. Every time someone looked at him and saw less than what he was capable of. He sat back down, breathing deeply. Okay, he said softly. Let's start again. He began reworking the problem from the beginning, breaking each part down, re-examining the logic. His mind cleared as if something inside had unlocked. He started to see the pattern, faint, subtle, hidden behind unnecessary steps. He whispered to himself as he worked, the pencil moving faster now. That's it. The coefficient doesn't fit. It cancels out. So the error wasn't the formula. It was in the setup. His heart began to race. For the first time, the problem made sense. The equation wasn't impossible. It was just misunderstood. He leaned forward, writing with renewed focus. Line after line, the puzzle unraveled. And when he finally reached the end, he paused, looked at the answer, then checked it again. And again, it was right. Perfectly right. Marcus sat back, staring at his work in disbelief. The exhaustion faded into something else, relief and pride. He whispered, almost in awe, I did it. The clock struck 3 a.m. The house was silent. Marcus closed his notebook, exhaling deeply. He knew no one would believe him. Not yet. But tomorrow he'd show them. He'd show all of them. He turned off the desk lamp and climbed into bed, but sleep didn't come easily. His mind was alive, replaying every step, every realization. He could still hear Mr. Harlan's voice echoing in his head. If you solve this problem, I'll quit my job. Marcus smiled faintly in the dark. You might want to start packing your things, Mr. Harlan. Outside, the first light of dawn began to touch the sky. The laughter from that day no longer haunted him. It fueled him. Because tomorrow wasn't going to be another ordinary day at Lincoln High. It was going to be the day everything changed. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that only existed after midnight. The rest of the world slept, but not Marcus Reed. His bedroom light glowed faintly through the window, flickering like a small candle fighting against the darkness. Inside, Marcus sat hunched over his desk, paper scattered everywhere, equations, notes, and pages filled with endless scribbles. The same equation stared back at him from the center of his notebook, mocking him with its complexity. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion setting in. Come on, he whispered to himself, tapping his pencil on the page. There has to be a way. The events of that day still haunted him. The laughter, the whispers, the smirk on Mr. Harlan's face. It all played on a loop in his mind. Every time he blinked, he could see it again, that board, that problem, and the room full of people who thought he couldn't do it. Now, it wasn't just about solving a math problem. It was about proving something to them, to his teacher, and to himself. Marcus opened his laptop and typed furiously into the search bar, advanced algebraic error correction in quadratic derivations. Dozens of results appeared. He clicked through one after another, online lectures, university notes, obscure math forums, anything that might help him find what he was missing. He watched a video of an old professor explaining differential analysis. The man spoke fast, the formulas flying across the screen. Marcus paused, rewound, scribbled notes, then rewound again. Hours passed like minutes. His eyes burned, but he didn't care. "Okay," he muttered, staring at the screen. "So if the derivative flips when the coefficient is negative, that means..." He froze. No, that couldn't be it. Or could it? He wrote the equation again, carefully this time, step by step. Then, just when he thought he was on to something, the answer fell apart again. Wrong. Completely wrong. Marcus groaned and dropped his pencil, burying his face in his hands. "What am I missing?" he whispered. The digital clock on his desk blinked 1:37 a.m. He stood up, stretching his stiff shoulders, and looked around the room. It was a mess. Papers on the floor, half-empty coffee mug, a notebook covered in eraser shavings. His mind was tired, his body heavier than it had ever felt. He thought of giving up, just closing the book, forgetting the whole thing. No one expected him to win this fight anyway. But as he stared at the board again, something inside him whispered, "Don't stop now." He took a deep breath, walked to his window, and looked outside. The world was calm, streetlights glowing, leaves swaying in the wind. Somewhere in that silence, he found a flicker of focus. He sat back down, determined. One more try. The next evening, he decided to visit someone who might understand. His grandfather, Thomas Reed, a retired math teacher. His grandfather's small house smelled of old books and cinnamon tea. Every wall was lined with shelves of dusty encyclopedias, faded notebooks, and neatly labeled binders from his teaching years. "Marcus," the old man greeted, smiling warmly. "Didn't expect to see you at this hour. Everything okay?" Marcus hesitated. I need your help with something." His grandfather chuckled. "Math trouble? Haven't heard that from you in a long time." Marcus smiled faintly and set his notebook on the table. "It's not homework. It's a challenge." He explained what happened in class. The laughter, the challenge, the problem. His grandfather listened silently, eyes narrowing with every word. When Marcus finished, the room was quiet. "So your teacher mocked you," Thomas said slowly. "And you want to prove him wrong?" Marcus nodded. "Not just that. I need to prove him wrong." Thomas leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful look on his face. "You remind me of myself when I was your age. Stubborn, proud, hungry to be seen." He picked up the notebook, studying the equation carefully. His brow furrowed. "This is not a simple problem. It's designed to trip you up." Marcus leaned forward. "Can you help me solve it?" His grandfather smiled faintly. "No, Marcus, you have to solve it. But I can help you think." He walked to the chalkboard mounted on the wall, a relic from his teaching days, and began sketching the formula. "You see," he said, his voice calm and precise, "math isn't about memorizing steps. It's about patterns. Every problem hides a rhythm, like music. You just have to listen." Marcus watched closely as the old man drew a series of graphs and notes. "Try this," Thomas said, handing him the chalk. "Start again, but this time listen for pattern." Marcus hesitated, then began to write. His hand trembled at first, but soon he fell into rhythm. Step by step, he retraced the logic. His grandfather watched quietly, only speaking when Marcus made a misstep. Hours passed. The clock struck midnight. The table was covered with sheets filled with equations and notes. Marcus leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "It still doesn't add up." Thomas smiled softly. "Then you haven't looked deep enough. You're still seeing the problem, the way your teacher wanted you to. Don't look where he told you to look. Look where he didn't. Marcus blinked. What do you mean? Teachers. The bad ones, they build boxes. The good ones teach you how to break them. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus looked back at the equation, his eyes scanning every number, every symbol. Something clicked inside him. A small detail, something subtle, stood out. The variable placements weren't aligned. One coefficient was written differently in his notes from how he remembered it on the board. Wait, was that the mistake? He started reworking it from that new angle. Slowly, the math began to flow. The inconsistencies resolved. The logic connected. It wasn't complete yet, but for the first time, it made sense. Thomas smiled as he watched the light return to his grandson's eyes. There it is, he said quietly. That look, the look of discovery. Marcus laughed softly, shaking his head. I think I found something. His grandfather nodded. Don't rush it. Let it breathe. Sometimes the mind finds answers while the body rests. Get some sleep. Marcus glanced at the clock, 2:18 a.m., and exhaled. Yeah, he said, closing his notebook. Maybe you're right. He hugged his grandfather goodnight and stepped out into the cool night air. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, shimmering like quiet witnesses to his determination. Back home, Marcus sat at his desk once more. The house was dark, except for the soft glow of his lamp. He opened his notebook and stared at the equation one last time. Every detail of the problem now felt different, alive, layered with meaning. He remembered his grandfather's words. Look where he didn't. He studied the terms again, slower this time. His pencil hovered above the page, then moved 1, 2, 3 quick strokes. His breath caught. There it was, the missing link, a subtle pattern hidden within the coefficients, something Mr. Harlan had overlooked entirely. It wasn't a mistake in the math. It was a misinterpretation of how the equation interacted with its own structure. Marcus leaned back, heart pounding. That's it, he whispered. That's the pattern. The exhaustion faded. Adrenaline surged through him. He grabbed a fresh page and began writing furiously, transferring his notes, refining every step, making sure each line made sense. He checked, double-checked, and verified. Every answer led perfectly into the next. Hours slipped by again, unnoticed. When he finally stopped, the first rays of dawn were peeking through his window. Marcus stared at his finished work. Pages of careful calculation, neat and precise. He felt the weight of victory building quietly in his chest. Not the loud kind, but the deep, satisfying kind. The kind that comes after fighting for something no one believed he could achieve. He exhaled slowly, whispering to himself, You wanted me to fail, Mr. Harlan, but you gave me the best lesson of my life. He set his pencil down, closed a notebook, and smiled. Tomorrow, he would walk into that classroom with proof in his hands, and a fire in his heart that no one could laugh at again. The morning light crept through Malik's window, painting golden streaks across his cluttered desk. The air still smelled faintly of pencil lead and cold coffee. His notebook lay open, filled with pages of equations, arrows, and frantic notes. He hadn't slept much, but for the first time in days, he didn't feel tired. He felt ready. Malik sat down, straightened his papers, and whispered to himself, All right, let's see if I was right. He flipped back to the page where he'd left off last night, the one where that single spark of insight had appeared. The numbers looked different now. They weren't just random symbols anymore. They had meaning. They had rhythm. He began slowly, tracing each line of the equation with his pencil. His voice was low but steady. If A equals 1, then B shifts left, which means the derivative flips. He paused, checking his earlier notes. The pencil tapped gently against the desk. Then a small smile appeared on his face. It fits, he whispered. It actually fits. But Malik wasn't one to trust a single pass. He grabbed another sheet, rewrote the problem entirely, and started again from scratch. The steps flowed easier this time, his confidence growing with every calculation. Step by step, the puzzle began to unfold like a story finally revealing its ending. Every line connected, every symbol aligned. The logic was clean, almost elegant. Hours seemed to vanish. The world outside blurred into silence. There was only Malik, his pencil, and the heartbeat of discovery echoing in his chest. He checked the final step again, then again, whispering numbers under his breath. For times -2 divided by, his hand froze. He stared at the paper. His eyes widened. "That's it," he breathed. "Oh my God, that's it." The realization hit, like a jolt of electricity. Every failed attempt, every sleepless night, every mocking laugh from that classroom, it all came rushing back, now replaced with one overwhelming truth. He did it. Malik leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His heart raced so fast it hurt to breathe. For a long moment, he just sat there in disbelief. Then, slowly, he began to laugh, a quiet, shaky laugh that turned into tears. He wiped his eyes and looked down at the notebook. His handwriting was messy, his eraser marks everywhere, but it didn't matter. In that chaos, he had found clarity. He picked up a fresh sheet of paper. "It deserves to be perfect," he said softly. Then, with steady hands, he began rewriting the entire solution, neatly this time. Line by line, symbol by symbol, every number carried the weight of his journey. As he wrote, the memories replayed, Mr. Harlan's smirk, the student's laughter, the whisper. "You think you're smart? Prove it." Malik pressed harder on the pencil, his determination carving deep into the page. "I just did," he whispered. When he finished, he leaned back and looked at the final sheet. The equation, once a symbol of humiliation, now stood before him as proof of his triumph. It was beautiful, clean, flawless. Malik smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. It was the first time he'd felt that in days. The exhaustion in his bones felt lighter now, replaced by something fierce and alive. He placed the completed paper on the desk and stared at it like it was a trophy. "This," he said softly, "is more than math." He thought of his grandfather's words. "Bad teachers build boxes. Good ones teach you to break them." Malik had broken the biggest box of all, doubt. He looked out the window. The sun was higher now, shining bright and warm. Kids were walking to school, backpacks bouncing on their shoulders, laughter in the distance. For once, Malik couldn't wait to join them. But before leaving, he picked up his phone and snapped a picture of the solution. He didn't know why. Maybe for proof, maybe for pride. But deep down, he knew this moment deserved to be remembered. He gathered his books, slipped the paper carefully into a folder, and zipped his backpack. As he stood, he glanced around his room, the battlefield of his struggle. Crumpled papers littered the floor. Empty mugs sat like silent witnesses. The faint chalk marks on his whiteboard caught his eye. He smiled again. Guess it was worth every night. He turned off the desk lamp. The once flickering light that had guided him through the darkness was no longer needed. On the way to school, Malik walked differently. His steps were steady, his shoulders relaxed, his eyes forward. The morning breeze brushed against his face, and for the first time, the world didn't feel so heavy. He wasn't nervous anymore, not even about seeing Mr. Harlan again, because this time, Malik wasn't walking into that classroom to defend himself. He was walking in with proof. A few kids called his name as he entered the school hallway, but he barely heard them. His mind was laser-focused. He reached the classroom early, placing his notebook gently on the front desk. He looked at the board, the same place where humiliation had once begun. Today, it would become the place of his redemption. The classroom door opened behind him. It was Mr. Harlan, his coffee cup in one hand, his usual bored expression in place. He looked surprised to see Malik there, before everyone else. "Read," he said flatly. "You're early. Couldn't sleep after that math lesson." Malik smiled faintly, calm and composed. "Actually, I didn't sleep much. I was working on that problem." Mr. Harlan raised a brow, amused. "Oh, that again? You really don't give up, do you?" Malik held up his folder. "No, sir. I just finished it." The teacher laughed, shaking his head. "You finished it? Kid, that's a graduate-level problem. You expect me to believe." But Malik didn't answer. He simply opened the folder, took out the paper, and placed it gently on the desk in front of him. Mr. Harlan's laughter faded. His eyes drifted down to the page. The symbols were clean, precise, methodical, not random guesses. Real work, logical flow, perfect structure. He frowned, tracing the steps with his finger. Then his brow furrowed. Then again, the silence grew heavier. Malik watched, expression steady. Inside, his heart was pounding. Finally, Mr. Harlan looked up. For the first time, he didn't have that smirk. "Where did you learn this?" he asked quietly. Malik shrugged lightly. "I didn't. I figured it out." The teacher's lips parted, but no words came out. He looked at the page again, disbelief mixing with something Malik had never seen in his eyes before: respect. As the bell rang and students began to fill the room, Malik took his seat. He didn't need to say anything more. The paper on the desk said it all. Mr. Harlan stood frozen at the front, still staring at the impossible solution. Malik smiled to himself. For the first time, he felt seen, not as a stereotype, not as someone to laugh at, but as someone capable of greatness. And as he sat there, the faintest grin tugged at his lips. "Tomorrow," he whispered under his breath, "the world's going to know." The next morning arrived wrapped in quiet determination. The sun had barely risen when Malik Reed stepped onto the sidewalk leading to Brooksville High. His backpack was lighter than usual, but inside it carried the heaviest proof of his life: the solved equation. Every sound around him, the crunch of his shoes on gravel, the distant chatter of students, felt muted. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't scared. He was ready. As he approached the entrance, his reflection glinted faintly in the glass doors. Gone was the boy who'd left in shame just a day before. What returned was someone different, someone who had found his voice in silence. Inside, the school buzzed as usual. But Malik noticed the whispers again. Soft laughter, the kind that trails behind when you walk past. Someone muttered, "Hey, that's the kid who thought he could beat Mr. Harlan's problem." Malik didn't even look their way. He just adjusted his backpack strap and kept walking. When he reached room 204, he paused at the door for a brief moment. He could hear the faint scrape of chalk inside, Mr. Harlan's voice echoing confidently. Malik took a deep breath and stepped in. The door creaked open, and a few heads turned. The morning lesson was already underway. "Ah, Reed," Mr. Harlan said, glancing at him. "Nice of you to join us. Hopefully, you brought your humility this time." A few snickers rippled through the class. Malik smiled politely and took his seat in the middle row. He didn't react, didn't speak. He just placed his folder neatly on the desk. Mr. Harlan continued, his tone dripping with confidence. "Now, where were we? Yes, partial differentials. A concept far too advanced for most of you." He turned back to the board, his chalk squealing against the surface. Malik watched quietly, his heartbeat calm but strong. His fingers brushed over the folder in front of him, the one holding his solution. Minutes ticked by. The lesson continued. Then, without planning it, Malik's hand slowly rose into the air. The room went still. Even the chalk froze mid-sentence. Mr. Harlan turned, brow raised. "Yes, Reed." Malik's voice was steady. "I solved it." A low murmur ran through the room. Several students exchanged looks. Someone whispered, "He's still on that?" Mr. Harlan chuckled, setting the chalk down. "You solved it." He crossed his arms. "You mean the same equation that baffled you yesterday?" "Yes, sir," Malik replied. "That one." The teacher's smirk deepened. "Well, this should be entertaining." He motioned toward the front. "By all means, enlighten us." Malik stood up slowly, gathering his paper. The sound of his chair scraping the floor echoed across the room. He walked to the front, every step deliberate. The class watched, half curious, half eager to see him fail again. When Malik reached the board, he didn't hesitate. He handed the paper to Mr. Harlan. "It's all there," he said quietly. The teacher took it with a smirk, glancing at the first few lines. His expression shifted slightly, confusion flickering for a moment before returning to confidence. "Go ahead," Malik said. "You can check it." Mr. Harlan turned toward the board and began writing Malik's steps one by one. The chalk tapped rhythmically. As he reached the midpoint of the equation, the rhythm slowed. His brows furrowed. Students leaned in. Even the chatter died out. Mr. Harlan paused, glanced back at the page, then at Malik. "You," he cleared his throat. "You use an alternate variable substitution?" Malik nodded. "Yes, sir. I noticed a symmetry when I restructured the first function. It cancels out the extra variable." The teacher's eyes flickered with something new, unease. He turned back to the board, continuing the steps. His movements grew slower, quieter. By the time he reached the last line, his hand stopped completely. The chalk hovered midair. Silence. Every student in the room stared at the board, at the final answer, the exact same answer from the textbook's reference solution. Mr. Harlan's hand trembled slightly. "That's," he murmured. "That's correct." The room erupted in stunned whispers. Someone gasped audibly. Another voice muttered, "No way." Malik stood still, hands in his pockets, watching the man who had once laughed at him now face the truth written in chalk. Mr. Harlan turned, his face pale, his pride clearly cracking. How did you?" Malik met his eyes. "You told me to prove it," he said softly. "So I did." A heavy silence settled over the class. No one dared to speak. Then from the back, a student, Jordan, grinned and whispered, "Told you, man." The tension broke, replaced by murmurs of disbelief and quiet applause that grew louder with every second. Mr. Harlan stepped back, rubbing his temple. His voice was low. This doesn't make sense." Malik shrugged gently. "Math usually does, when you stop underestimating who's doing it." The teacher's jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the board again. The weight of his own words from yesterday hung heavy in the air. "If you solve this, I'll quit my job." Every student remembered. A murmur rose from the room. Someone whispered it aloud. Then another repeated it, louder this time. Soon, half the class was chanting softly. "He said he'd quit. He said he'd quit." Mr. Harlan froze, the color draining from his face. Malik didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply stepped back from the board, calm and composed. You don't have to quit, sir," he said evenly. "Just maybe start believing in your students." The words landed like a quiet punch. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Mr. Harlan looked down at the paper again, the same one he dismissed as impossible. For the first time, his voice softened. "You're a remarkable student, Reed." Malik nodded politely. "Thank you." The bell rang, breaking the tension. Students stood, still whispering as they filed out. But every eye turned to Malik with something new. Respect. He walked back to his seat, gathered his books, and took one last look at the board. His equation, his victory, was still there, unchallenged, untouched. As he left the room, the camera lingers, on the chalk still hanging in midair, on Mr. Harlan staring silently at the board, and on Malik walking down the hallway with quiet triumph. The boy who once sat in the back now walked forward with purpose, because he hadn't just solved a math problem. He had rewritten a lesson. The classroom felt different that morning, heavier, quieter, as if the air itself sensed what was about to happen. Malik could hear the faint buzz of the ceiling lights and the soft shuffle of shoes against the floor, every sound amplified by the thumping of his heart. He sat at his desk, fingers tapping nervously against his notebook, the same notebook that now held the secret, the solution that had kept him awake all night. Mr. Harlan entered the room, coffee mug in hand, the same smirk stretching across his face. "All right, class," he said, flipping open his binder. "Let's pick up where we left off yesterday. The problem that stumped everyone." A few students chuckled. Some glanced at Malik, expecting another show, another moment where the quiet black kid would try, fail, and sink back into silence. But today, Malik didn't shrink. He sat taller. As Mr. Harlan began writing the equation on the board, the same long, winding expression that had humiliated Malik before, something inside him steadied. The numbers weren't a wall anymore. They were a path, one he had already walked in the privacy of his room. Mr. Harlan turned to the class. "Now, does anyone think they can solve it this time?" The room stayed silent. And then Malik raised his hand. The scraping sound of his chair against the floor drew every eye in the room. For a moment, even the clock seemed to stop ticking. "Yes, Malik." Mr. Harlan said, half amused. Back for round two? Malik stood, calm and composed. I'd like to solve it, he said. A few students exchanged smirks. One whispered, he's going to embarrass himself again. Mr. Harlan crossed his arms, that patronizing grin never leaving his face. Be my guess. Malik walked to front, each step echoing louder than the last. His palms were sweating, but his mind was sharp, clearer than it had ever been. He picked up the chalk, stared at the problem for one last second, and began. His voice was steady. First, we isolate the variable. The chalk glided across the board, drawing lines, symbols, fractions. The rhythm of his writing was calm, deliberate, confident. The class watched in silence. At first, Mr. Harlan leaned casually against the desk, pretending to look bored. But as Malik continued, something in his posture changed. His arms slowly uncrossed, his brow furrowed. Malik didn't notice. He was lost in the numbers, explaining each step with precision. We factor here, then substitute and simplify. He turned slightly toward the class. See, this term cancels out. That's where most people go wrong. Whispers spread like ripples. Students leaned in, eyes widening as the equation started to unfold into something coherent, something that worked. Mr. Harlan stepped closer to the board, trying to catch an error. Any error. His lips moved silently as he followed Malik's calculations. But there were none. Finally, Malik placed the chalk down and drew the final line. And that, he said softly, is the answer. For a moment, complete silence. The room froze. Then a low murmur started. Wait, that's right. Is that correct? He actually did it. Mr. Harlan blinked, staring at the board as if it had betrayed him. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Malik turned to face him. His voice was calm, respectful, but firm. You said if I solved it, you'd quit your job. A stunned gasp rippled through the room. Mr. Harlan's face flushed crimson. That was a joke, he stammered. No one expected. But you said it, Malik interrupted quietly, in front of everyone. The students began whispering louder now, some even pulling out their phones. Mr. Harlan's jaw tightened. He looked at the board again, desperate to find something wrong. Anything, but the numbers stood tall, undeniable. Malik's solution wasn't just correct. It was elegant, efficient, and clear. Finally, he stepped back, exhaling through clenched teeth. Class dismissed. But no one moved. Malik stood there, feeling a rush of heat behind his eyes. Not anger, not pride, but release. All the nights of frustration, the laughter, the doubt, it all dissolved in that single moment. As he walked back to his seat, a few students began to clap. Then more joined. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in applause. For the first time in his life, Malik didn't look down. He met every gaze head-on. And there, amid the chaos, Mr. Harlan sat behind his desk, silent, staring at the board, at the proof that the boy he mocked had outsmarted him in front of everyone. Malik sat back down, the echoes of the clapping still ringing in his ears. He opened his notebook, where the same solution was written neatly, the one he believed in when no one else did. He closed it, smiling faintly to himself. That was the moment Malik knew. This wasn't just about a math problem. It was about something much bigger. Proof that brilliance had no color, and courage could silence even the loudest doubt. The bell rang. Students filed out, still buzzing about what they'd just witnessed. As Malik packed his bag, he glanced once more at the board, his work still shining in white chalk under the sunlight streaming through the window. He took a deep breath and whispered, "That's for every time you laughed." Then he walked out, calm, steady, unstoppable. The camera lingers on the empty classroom. The chalkboard glows faintly, the final equation still visible, a silent monument to Malik's triumph. And somewhere down the hall, Malik's footsteps fade as the narrator's voice returns softly. Some moments don't need applause. They rewrite the story on their own. Fade to black. For a long, breathless moment, no one spoke. The sound of the chalk still rolling across the floor echoed faintly. The last remnant of what had just happened. Mr. Harlan stood frozen beside the board, his coffee mug trembling slightly in his hand. Malik's equation glowed under the sunlight that spilled to the classroom window. Every number, every symbol stood in quiet defiance of everything Mr. Harlan had believed about him. The silence stretched heavy and unyielding. Students shifted in their seats, glancing between Malik and their teacher. Some were still recording on their phones. Others just stared, waiting. Finally, Malik's calm voice broke the stillness. "You said if I solved it, you'd quit your job." It wasn't loud. It wasn't mocking. Just a quiet reminder, spoken with the same grace he had always carried, even when others hadn't shown him the same. Mr. Harlan blinked, as though he hadn't heard correctly. His lips parted, then closed again. He forced a dry laugh. "Oh, come on, Malik," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "That was just a figure of speech. You know, motivation." But the room didn't laugh with him. The students' eyes stayed fixed, unblinking. They had all heard the challenge, and they had all seen it fulfilled. Malik didn't move. "Motivation or not," he said softly, "you still said it." That sentence landed like a hammer. The tension in the air became almost physical, thick enough to taste. Mr. Harlan tried to regain his footing. He straightened, putting on his usual confident smirk. "Look, kid, don't get ahead of yourself. You probably memorized something from online." "Then check it," Malik interrupted. His voice, still calm, carried a new kind of strength. "Go through every line, every step. You'll see it's right." Mr. Harlan hesitated. The board stood there like a witness, daring him to refute it. He stepped closer, tracing Malik's calculations with his eyes, his finger trembling slightly as he followed each symbol. One line correct, next step flawless, final result exact. He stepped back, his face pale. His students saw it, the disbelief, the humiliation, the fear of being wrong. One student in the back whispered, "He really did it." Another added quietly, "You owe him an apology." The murmurs spread like wildfire. Phones lifted higher, catching every angle of Mr. Harlan's frozen face. "Put your phones away," he barked suddenly, his voice cracking under pressure. This is not a spectacle. But the authority behind his words was gone. His voice no longer commanded the room. It only echoed weakly against the walls. Malik didn't gloat. He simply stood by his desk, watching silently. His expression wasn't angry, just steady, unbroken, free. For years, he had been underestimated, dismissed, laughed at. And now, without raising his voice, he had turned every insult into a lesson Mr. Harlan would never forget. Finally, Malik spoke again, softly, almost like a teacher himself. "You told me I didn't belong in your class. You said I wasn't smart enough to understand this." He gestured toward the board. "But I did." Mr. Harlan's jaw tightened. He looked down at the floor, searching for words that wouldn't come. "You said if I solved it, you'd quit." Malik's words carried no malice, only truth. "So what happens now?" The question hung in the air like a sentence waiting to be read. Mr. Harlan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The students watched him crumble silently under the weight of his own arrogance. He glanced toward the door, desperate for escape, then back at the board, the equation that had destroyed his pride. And in that moment, his silence said everything. The students knew. Malik knew. Even Mr. Harlan knew. He had been wrong, not just about the math, but about the boy who had stood before him all along. "Class dismissed," Mr. Harlan finally muttered, his voice barely a whisper. No one moved. One by one, students began to rise, not in haste, but in quiet disbelief. A few patted Malik on the shoulder as they walked past. Some offered him small smiles, nods of respect. When the room finally emptied, only Malik and Mr. Harlan remained. The teacher stood at his desk, pretending to shuffle papers that didn't need shuffling. His hands trembled slightly. Malik walked over, stopping a few feet away. "I didn't want to embarrass you," he said softly. "I just wanted a chance." Mr. Harlan looked up, eyes red-rimmed with the weight of unspoken regret. He didn't reply. He couldn't. Malik picked up his bag and turned toward the door. As he reached for the handle, he paused and looked back one last time. "You taught me something," he said quietly. Not the lesson you meant to, but one I'll never forget. Then he left. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Mr. Harlan alone in the stillness. He stared at the chalkboard, Malik's solution still glowing in perfect white. Slowly, he walked up to it, running his fingers along the final line. His reflection shimmered faintly in the window beside it. A man forced to confront the truth of his own prejudice. The camera lingers on him as his voice breaks the silence, barely audible. I was wrong. Outside, Malik walked to the hallway, light spilling across his face. Students whispered his name, some smiling in awe, others an apology. He didn't stop to listen. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than any words ever could. As he stepped out into the open air, a calm wind brushed against his face. The sun felt warmer than it had in weeks. He smiled at himself, not out of victory, but peace. Because for the first time, Malik knew he didn't need to prove anything anymore. The world had finally seen him for who he was. Brilliant, resilient, unstoppable. By the next morning, the story had spread through the entire school like wildfire. Whispers trailed Malik wherever he walked, in the hallways, the cafeteria, even the courtyard. Students who'd once laughed at him now looked with quiet awe, their voices carrying one name over and over, Malik Carter. Clips from yesterday's class had already made their way online. The video, Student Outsmarts Teacher with Genius Math Solution, had begun circulating among students, parents, even local forums. By the time the first bell rang, the entire faculty had heard about it. Malik tried to stay calm, keeping his backpack slung low and his gaze forward. But when the intercom crackled to life, his heart skipped a beat. Malik Carter and Mr. Harlan, please report to the principal's office. The hallway went silent. As he stood, Malik could feel every eye on him. Mr. Harlan, standing at the far end of the hall, caught his glance. His expression unreadable, his posture stiff. The two walked in uneasy silence toward the main office. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The principal, Mrs. Elaine Patterson, sat behind her large oak desk, glasses perched on the edge of her nose. She was known throughout Jefferson High as fair but firm, and right now, her gaze was as sharp as glass. Sit, she said curtly. Malik sat quietly, hands clasped in his lap. Mr. Harlan dropped into the chair beside him, arms crossed tightly, trying to appear unfazed. Mrs. Patterson adjusted her glasses and looked at the two of them. I received several calls this morning. Apparently, there was an incident in class yesterday. Mr. Harlan spoke first. Too quickly. It's been blown completely out of proportion. A misunderstanding. Some students filmed part of my lesson without permission. The principal tilted her head. A misunderstanding, she repeated slowly. She turned her computer screen toward them. The pause video clearly showing Mr. Harlan smirk and Malik standing at the board. Then she pressed play. Mr. Harlan's own voice filled the office. If you saw this, I'll quit my job. A moment later, the video showed Malik completing the problem flawlessly. When it ended, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Mrs. Patterson folded her hands. That doesn't look like a misunderstanding to me. Mr. Harlan's face turned red. It was a joke. A classroom moment taken out of context. These kids, they twist things online. I was trying to motivate him. Malik looked up slowly. By laughing at me? He asked quietly. The teacher turned sharply toward him. You're out of line. That's enough. The principal cut in. Her tone was ice cold now. Mr. Harlan, I've reviewed Malik's work. His method was not only correct, it was advanced, beyond your own outline curriculum. Mr. Harlan opened his mouth, but no sound came. Furthermore, Mrs. Patterson continued, I've spoken with several students. They confirmed your comments, the dismissive tone, the laughter. That's not teaching, Mr. Harlan. That's humiliation. The silence that followed was deafening. Malik sat still, but inside his heart raced. For the first time, someone in authority was standing up for him, and it felt both strange and powerful. Mrs. Patterson leaned forward, her expression softening slightly as she turned to Malik. You handled yourself with remarkable composure. Not many students could do what you did. Malik nodded politely. Thank you, ma'am. I didn't mean for it to turn into all this. I just wanted to prove I could do it. Mrs. Patterson's voice lowered. You did more than that. You reminded this entire school what respect and perseverance look like. She turned back to Mr. Harlan. I'll be contacting the district about this incident. For now, you're suspended pending review. Mr. Harlan shot up from his chair. Suspended? You can't be serious. I am, the principal said firmly. You made a promise in front of your students, and you broke their trust. Whether you quit or not, your conduct will be investigated. The teacher's voice cracked under the weight of his frustration. This is absurd. You're taking a child's word over mine. No, she replied, locking eyes with him. I'm taking the true side. He froze, his mouth half open, then stormed toward the door. As he yanked it open, he muttered under his breath, This whole place has lost its mind. The door slammed shut behind him. Mrs. Patterson exhaled, rubbing her temple. Then she looked at Malik again, her tone softening. You've been through a lot, haven't you? Malik hesitated, then nodded. It's not the first time someone thought I couldn't do something. She gave a faint smile. Well, they'll think twice next time. For a moment, the office felt peaceful, almost proud. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned. It's the district office, she murmured, then answered. Malik could only hear one side of the conversation. Short, serious replies. Yes, I saw the video, understood. I'll prepare the report immediately. When she hung up, she looked thoughtful. It seems this incident has gone beyond our walls. The school board wants an official meeting. Malik blinked. The board? Yes, she said. And the local paper already called for a statement. Apparently, parents are demanding accountability. Malik's stomach tightened. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Mrs. Patterson smiled softly. Sometimes, doing the right thing causes ripples, especially when it challenges what's wrong. Outside, the faint buzz of voices filled the hall again, the school alive with gossip and disbelief. Malik could hear fragments. That's the kid from the video. He really beat Mr. Harlan. They're calling a meeting tonight. He stood, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. Thank you, ma'am, he said quietly. Mrs. Patterson nodded. Keep your head high, Malik. You earned it. As he stepped into the hallway, the sunlight through the windows washed over him. Students moved aside as he passed, not out of fear, but respect. Every step felt lighter, though he knew this wasn't over. Somewhere behind him, the principal's door closed again, and the phone started ringing. The story was spreading far beyond Jefferson High now, and soon the entire community would have something to say. Malik glanced toward the math wing one last time. The classroom where he'd once been mocked now stood quiet. He took a deep breath, eyes steady. The truth was finally out, but the real test, the one beyond equations and chalkboards, was only beginning. The morning after Malik's meeting with the principal, the world outside Jefferson High began to stir. It started small, a single post on social media, shared by one of his classmates. A shaky video, 15 seconds long, captioned with just 6 words. Our teacher mocked him. He solved it. Within hours, it was everywhere. The video hit 1 million views before noon. Students across the country began sharing it, using hashtags like #RespectMalik and #MathGenius. News outlets picked it up, turning Malik Carter into an overnight symbol, not just of intelligence, but of quiet strength. Cameras began showing up outside the school gates. Local reporters wanted interviews. Teachers whispered in the hallways. And as Malik sat in the cafeteria that day, tray untouched, he could feel the weight of every phone turned in his direction. Yo, Malik, a student shouted across the room. You're trending, man. He looked up, half smiling, unsure how to respond. He hadn't asked for fame. He'd only wanted fairness. But now, fairness had found its spotlight. By afternoon, major news channels had run the headline. Teen outsmarts teacher in viral math moment. The clip replayed again and again, Mr. Harlan's laughter, Malik's calm explanation, the stunned silence that followed. Experts chimed in. A professor from MIT tweeted, This young man demonstrates the kind of brilliance and humility we should be nurturing in our schools. Another educator wrote, "This isn't just about math, it's about dignity." At home, Malik sat beside his mother on their worn brown couch, watching it unfold. She turned to him, eyes glistening. "You see, baby, they're finally seeing you the way I always have." Malik smiled softly. "It still feels unreal." She put a hand on his shoulder. "Real or not, you earned every bit of it." On the coffee table in front of them lay his original notebook, the one filled with crossed-out equations and late-night scribbles. It was a reminder of the long hours, the frustration, the tears that no one saw. Now, the world was watching the result. By the end of the week, an email arrived, official letterhead, bold text at the top, "Invitation to the National Youth Mathematics Summit, Washington, D.C." Malik's hands trembled slightly as he read it aloud. "They want me to speak about perseverance and problem-solving." His mother's smile widened. "You're going to change more than numbers this time, Malik. You're going to change minds." Days later, he found himself standing backstage at the summit, a massive auditorium filled with hundreds of students, teachers, and reporters. The bright stage lights bled through the curtains. His heart pounded like a drum. A coordinator whispered, "You're up next." He stepped onto the stage to the sound of applause, hesitant at first, then swelling into something thunderous. The host introduced him. "Please welcome Malik Carter, the student who turned humiliation into history." Malik took a deep breath, stepping to the microphone. His voice trembled at first, but steadied as he spoke. "I'm not a genius," he began. "I'm just someone who refused to believe I wasn't capable. When someone tells you you're not enough, that's not the truth. That's their limit, not yours." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. He continued, voice filled with quiet conviction. "I spent nights doubting myself, thinking maybe they were right. But I learned something. The hardest problems aren't solved on the board. They're solved inside you. You don't give up. You keep trying until the answer finally makes sense." A few people rose to their feet, then more. Soon, the entire room stood, applause echoing to the hall, tears in some eyes, pride in others. Malik smiled shyly, lowering his head as the noise washed over him. For once, he didn't feel small. Meanwhile, back in his hometown, Jefferson High was making headlines for another reason. Mr. Harlan's resignation letter was quietly submitted to the district office. The official statement cited personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. The same story that lifted Malik up had brought his teacher's arrogance crashing down. Some said it was poetic justice. Others said it was a lesson. But for Malik, it wasn't about revenge. It was about release. That night, as he returned home from the summit, the city skyline glowing beneath the night sky, he stood by his bedroom window and whispered to himself, "I did it." Not out of pride, but relief. He opened his notebook once more, flipping through pages of old equations. On the last blank page, he wrote in neat handwriting, "Never let their laughter define your limit." He closed it gently, the soft sound echoing in the quiet room. His phone buzzed again. Another notification, another wave of messages from people around the world. Students saying they felt inspired, teachers promising to do better, strangers thanking him for reminding them to keep fighting. Malik leaned back, smiling faintly. The world had seen a viral video. But what they didn't see, what he would never forget, were the sleepless nights, the whispered prayers, and the strength it took to stand in front of that class. He looked up at the sky through his window, the same one he used to stare out when he felt like giving up. This time, it looked brighter. Because sometimes the smallest victories, one problem solved, one voice that refused to stay silent, can start something far bigger than anyone ever imagined. And somewhere, deep down, Malik knew this was only the beginning. The seasons had changed. Snow had melted from the rooftops. Spring sunlight now pouring into Jefferson High's hallways. The same halls where Malik Carter once sat in silence, mocked for daring to dream. But this time, things were different. Malik's name now carried a weight it never had before. Posters hung on bulletin boards. National Youth Mathematics Award winner, Malik Carter. His face appeared in the local newspaper, smiling shyly beside a headline that read, From classroom humiliation to national honor, he'd been awarded a full-ride scholarship to a prestigious university, something no one in his family had ever achieved. Yet even as applause echoed at the ceremony, Malik's heart wasn't in the spotlight. It was somewhere quieter, somewhere older, back home, where this journey had truly begun. That weekend, Malik took a bus out of town. The ride was long, winding through open fields and narrow roads until he reached a small, weathered house surrounded by oak trees. His grandfather sat on the porch, rocking slowly in his old wooden chair, a familiar sight that brought back years of childhood memories. The old man looked up as Malik approached, his face breaking into a proud smile. "Well, look who finally made it," he said, voice warm but teasing. "Our young professor." Malik laughed softly and stepped forward, handing him a neatly folded letter. "Grandpa, I wanted you to see this yourself." The old man adjusted his glasses, reading the letter carefully. His eyes moved over the university's seal, the scholarship details, and the handwritten signature at the bottom. For a long moment, he said nothing, then looked up, his eyes misty. "Full scholarship," he murmured. "You did it, boy." Malik sat beside him on the steps, the wood creaking under their weight. "It still doesn't feel real," he admitted. "Sometimes I wake up thinking it was all a dream. The video, the summit, everything." His grandfather chuckled softly. "Dreams are only dreams until you live them. Then they become proof that you were meant to be more than what people saw." A light breeze rustled the trees as silence settled between them. Birds sang faintly in the distance. Then the old man spoke again, his voice low and thoughtful. "You know, Malik, when I was your age, they used to tell me folks like us didn't belong in certain places, didn't deserve the same seats, the same books, the same chances." Malik looked at him, listening quietly. "But you," his grandfather continued, "you walked right into that classroom and proved them wrong without raising your voice. You didn't just solve an equation, son." He paused, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You solve a lesson about belief." Malik smiled softly, eyes glimmering. "I just wanted to prove I was capable." His grandfather shook his head slowly. "You proved something far greater than that. You showed what happens when dignity meets determination. You reminded the world that respect isn't given, it's earned, and you earned it the right way." As the sun dipped lower, Malik reached into his bag and pulled out his old math notebook. The same one that started it all. The edges were frayed, some pages nearly torn, equations scattered across them like a battlefield of ink. He flipped to the last page, the one where he'd written those words months ago. "Never let their laughter define your limit." His grandfather leaned closer, reading it. A slow, proud smile crept across his face. "That right there," he said, tapping the page gently, "is the kind of wisdom no teacher can grade." Malik chuckled softly, then looked up at the fading sky. "I guess it wasn't really about the math, was it?" The old man shook his head. "No, son, it was about the message. Math was just a language you used to speak your truth." That evening, as they shared dinner, cornbread, stew, and laughter, Malik found himself reflecting on the months that had passed. The humiliation, the challenge, the moment he stood before the class with nothing but courage and logic on his side. He realized that his victory hadn't come from solving a problem on the board. It had come from solving one inside himself. Later, as he prepared to leave, his grandfather stood and pulled him into a firm embrace. "Keep that fire in you," he said quietly, "because the world's full of people who will try to dim it. But the ones who make history, they're the ones who never stop shining." Malik nodded, emotion heavy in his chest. "I won't forget, Grandpa." As he walked down the dusty path toward the road, the sky above was painted with streaks of orange and gold. He paused for a moment, looking back at the small house, the man who had believed in him long before anyone else did. And in that moment, Malik understood something profound. The story wasn't about a teacher or a viral video, or even a scholarship. It was about a promise kept. A promise he made himself the day someone laughed at his potential. The promise that he would rise above it. Months later, Malik would begin his first semester at university. He'd walk into classrooms filled with new faces, new challenges, new expectations. And whenever doubt tried to whisper again, whenever someone underestimated him, he'd remember that moment in front of the board, the sound of silence after he'd solved the impossible. He'd remember his mother's tears of pride, his classmates' applause, his grandfather's words echoing softly in his heart. You didn't just solve an equation, you solved belief. And he'd smile, knowing that his story had become more than a moment in time. It had become a legacy, one written not in chalk or ink, but in courage, because Malik Carter didn't just prove a point, he proved a possibility. A reminder to every student, every dreamer, every person who's ever been doubted, that your worth is not measured by who mocks you, but by how you rise when they do. Sometimes the people who laugh at you aren't really laughing at you. They're laughing at what they can't yet understand, your potential, your patience, your quiet power. And sometimes that laughter is not meant to break you, but to see if you'll keep standing when the world turns its back. Malik Carter's story became more than a headline. It became a mirror, a reflection of every young dreamer who was ever told they weren't enough. From the classrooms of Chicago to the schools of small towns across the country, students began sharing his name. Teachers discussed it in staff meetings. Parents showed their kids a viral clip of a boy who stayed calm when mocked and changed everything by believing in himself. In one video, a young girl sat at her desk, whispering, "If Malik can do it, maybe I can too." That was the real victory. Not the equation, not the award, not the applause. It was the spark he left behind. Life had moved on from Malik, but his story lived in the air, like a quiet anthem of resilience. When he visited schools to speak, students would rush to meet him, holding notebooks and wide eyes full of curiosity. He'd smile and tell them the same thing every time. I wasn't special. I just didn't stop when it got hard. Sometimes he'd pause, glance at the crowd, and add softly, "And when they laughed, I used that as fuel." Because the noise doesn't matter if you know who you are. The audience always fell silent, the kind of silence that comes not from boredom, but from understanding. Narration softens here, reflective, poetic, almost like a lesson passed down through generations. It says, "Brilliance has no color. Respect has no shortcuts. And belief is the one equation that always balances, no matter who's holding the chalk." In the end, Malik didn't just teach a classroom or even a school. He taught the world that dignity can be louder than insult, and calm confidence can dismantle arrogance without a single shout. There's a moment near the end of his final speech, captured on camera, watched millions of times. Malik stands on stage, the lights shining softly against his face. He pauses, then says with quiet conviction, "The teacher said, if you solve this, I'll quit my job. But I wasn't trying to make him quit. I was trying to make myself believe. And once you believe, nothing and no one can stop you." The crowd rises to its feet. Applause fills the hall, not just for a student who proved a point, but for a young man who turned pain into power. The narration slows, the soft piano note begins to play. The voiceover says, "Maybe your version of Malik's classroom is different. Maybe at a workplace, a dream, a goal that people keep doubting. But the message remains the same. Keep going. Keep solving. Keep believing. Because someday, the same people who laughed at you will watch you succeed and wonder how you did it. And you'll smile not out of pride, but out of peace, knowing that the only person you ever needed to convince was yourself." Malik Carter's story ends where most begin, with faith in the unseen and courage that outlasted ridicule. He didn't just solve a math problem. He solved the problem of doubt. He reminded the world that confidence is not arrogance. It's quiet proof that you've met your reflection and decided not to shrink. So if you're listening now, and you've ever been laughed at, overlooked, or underestimated, remember this. You don't owe anyone your silence. You owe yourself your belief. Because the loudest revenge is success whispered in peace.